morning. Happy Monday. I hope your morning is off to a good start. Maybe you'll notice I have my dogs in my office with me this morning. We have two Great Danes, and I usually lock them out when I'm doing video, but I left the door open. So you might see their faces pop up in the screen, but hopefully there will be no barking. I am excited to hop on here today, and I have a great resource I wanted to share with you. With a freebie, so I'll make sure I link to that on the bottom. But I wanted to talk with you guys about context clues. Context clues is one of those things that I really struggled with teaching when I was in the classroom. And I always felt like it was this really abstract, hey, scooch. I thought that was this really abstract concept. It was one of those things that I would tell my students, reread the sentences before and after the unknown word, and I sort of just hoped that some magic would happen and that they would actually understand these unknown words. And it wasn't until I started teaching fourth grade, which was way too far into my teaching career, that I actually realized that I didn't understand how to use context clues myself. So if I didn't have a good understanding of it, obviously my students weren't going to have a good understanding of it either. So I have 3 tips and suggestions for you to use when you're teaching context clues. The first one is make sure that you are explicitly teaching your students the 5 different types of context clues. I think that was my first problem. I didn't actually realize that there were different clues that I could be looking for. On my website, and I'll add a link to this below, there is an anchor chart that outlines the 5 different types of context clues. And I would always use the word ideas to tell my students what to look for. And when they are looking for clues, they should be looking for inference clues, they should be looking for definition clues, they should be looking for example clues, antonym clues, and synonym clues. And first of all, helping students understand the different types of clues they should be looking for really helps them sort of like make it a little bit more concrete. All of a sudden, we're not just saying, look for some random clues. We're giving them very specific things they should look for. So now our students know what they're looking for. And when I would introduce and teach these different types of clues to my students, I would not do it all in the same day because it's kind of overwhelming. So we would basically take an entire week to learn context clues, and every day we would introduce a new type. So on Monday, we would introduce inference-based clues. Tuesday, we would introduce definition-based clues, and all throughout the week. And what we would do is I would either give them like examples that I would come up with, or I would find examples in a text so that way they could see specifically what we're looking for. So once my students know all of the different types of clues, the next thing you need to do, tip number 2, give them very focused practice. So context clues are one of those things that you can't teach once or even twice and expect your students to become masters at it. You need to make sure that you are giving them intentional focused practice on an ongoing basis. And I think especially because it is one of those things where we're asking them to come up with meanings of unknown words. It's really helpful if it is monitored and supported at the beginning until you know your students have the skills to do this on their own independently. So one of the things that I like to do to help with this is give them a word of the week routine. Eventually you could turn it into a word of the day routine, but this is something that we would do in our classroom. So the word of the week routine, the way it looked like for me, and this is the actual resource that I'll below, you can grab it for free on my website. What we would do is every week we would have a word that we would focus on. So this would be an example of a word that we would use. I tried to find tier 2 words. Tier 2 vocabulary are words that your students wouldn't know. It's not necessarily a part of their everyday vocabulary, but they might come across it. So you might have a student that would read plentiful in one of their books, but they might not have an idea of what that word means, which is why they need to know how to use context clues. So anyways, in our word of the week routine, students would have they would get a word, and then they would have a short little paragraph that uses that word in context. So what they do is they read that word, and then they have a series of tasks, vocabulary related tasks that they have to do with that word every day. So the very first thing that I'm having them do is read the word and then look at the context to make their prediction. But when they make their prediction, the other thing that they have to do is identify the specific clue type that they use to make their prediction. So I'm helping students become aware of what in that paragraph helped them figure out the meaning of that word. Was there a synonym included? Was there an antonym? Did the author give the definition? Did they include an example? So now students are becoming aware of their thinking around this unknown word. And that was really great because then the more students do that and identify the different clue types that help them make their prediction, the more likely they are to do that in their own reading independently, which is ultimately what we want. So once students make their prediction, then the next day we have them define the word. This could be done either independently, whole group. I like to have my students look up the words both in a dictionary to have them practice using an actual dictionary and then also using online reference tools. So either dictionary.com or thesaurus.com, giving them those online tools as well. So we come up with the definition of the word, and then we also dig deeper. So this is really important, and this helps them become just, I think, so much more aware of words and the connection between the words. And that's a lot of what using context clues is. It's using connections to your vocabulary base to identify unknown words. And so with the word of the week, students would then identify synonyms, antonyms, and then the part of speech. The reason why I have them identify the part of speech is I want students to understand what role does that word play in a sentence. If a student knows that a word is a verb, then their prediction also has to be a verb. Students can realize that a word is an adjective, then their prediction also needs to be an adjective. So it really helps students think a little bit more critically about the words and sentences and how they work together. So we spend a day where we go a little bit deeper. Then the next day, they're going to draw a picture. Anytime that we're working on vocabulary, I like to have my students come up with a pictorial cue as well. Anytime that they can have a symbol or an illustration, that really helps them sort of solidify the meaning in their head. And then the last thing that I have them do is I have them use that new word in a sentence. So the beginning of the week, they take the word, they read it, they make their prediction, and then they spend the rest of the week digging deep into that word. And then that really helps them solidify the meaning of that word. What was I going to say? Oh, so the thing that I realized with this is, one, students love this routine. It's a lot of fun for them. But then I also noticed them becoming so much more aware of these words in their reading. A lot of times my students would come to me and say, hey, Miss Marie, I saw that word in my independent reading text, or I heard you use that word in the read aloud. So they became so much more aware of these new words. And then I also saw it transfer to their writing. So when students have a much larger vocabulary and we expose them to these tier 2 vocabulary words, they're more likely to use them in their writing as well. And so it's an easy way for students to develop their skills at using context clues, but then also just to expand and build their vocabulary. So this is a 5-day, 5-week sample. And so there's 5 words in it. I'm going to link to it below. So if you want to try it out in your classroom, you could do it for 5 weeks, 1 word a week, or you can do it for 5 days, 1 word a day, whatever works for your students. This would also be a really great resource to use when you're teaching your students how to use context clues, because each example follows the different 5 examples. So the last thing that I would say is, when you are teaching your students how to use context clues, make sure they understand the reason why. I think so often we sort of skip the why behind what we are teaching. And I feel like when students understand the why, it becomes a lot more valuable and important. The reason why we want our students to know how to use context clues is because that opens up their access to so many more texts. And so when students have the ability to identify unknown words, they're going to be able to read text at a much higher level. And so I feel like as you're teaching context clues, make sure your students understand that when they learn how to when they learn how to find the meaning of unknown words, they have access to basically anything they want to read. All of a sudden, the world becomes so much easier for them because they no longer have to be worried about reading text, not understanding words, because they have the skills to identify them. So let me review 3 things. If you're teaching context clues, 1, make sure you are explicitly teaching your students different types of context clues. 2, make sure you are giving them intentional, focused practice. It's not something that we can teach one time and then forget about it. And then 3, make sure your students understand the why. Make sure they understand that this is a skill that is going to open up their reading world at a much greater level. I will link to this resource below if you want to grab it for free. And I hope that you have a really great week this week.